The Geiger counter screamed so loud in John Wayne's hands, he thought the damn thing was broken, just static and clicks that wouldn't stop, no matter where he pointed it in that Utah desert. Wait, because what that machine was actually measuring would kill half the people standing on that film set, and 20 years later, a Pentagon official would say the words nobody wanted to hear. Please God, don't let us have killed John Wayne. Snow Canyon, Utah, summer of 1954. The temperature hit 120 degrees by noon and stayed there, baking the red rock formations until the stone itself seemed to radiate heat back into the air. The dust got into everything: cameras, costumes, lungs, food. The corners of your eyes when you tried to sleep at night in the trailers they'd hauled out from Los Angeles. John Wayne stood in a ridiculous getup trying to play Genghis Khan, which was already a disaster before anyone started worrying about what was in the air they were breathing. The studio had picked this location because it looked like Mongolia, remote, dramatic, cheap. Wayne hated the costume from day one. The silk robes felt wrong on his frame, too light and flowing for a man who'd spent 20 years in leather and denim. The wig kept slipping in the heat, and the makeup department had to reapply the eyeliner 3 times a day because sweat washed it down his cheeks in brown streaks. He'd stand between takes, 6'4" in Mongol warrior gear, drinking warm water from canteens that tasted like metal and rubber, watching the horizon shimmer in waves of heat distortion. What they didn't advertise in the location scouts' reports was the view. On clear days, if you looked northwest, you could see the mushroom clouds from the Nevada test site. 137 miles upwind, 11 atomic bombs had been detonated there the previous year as part of Operation Upshot Knothole. 2 of them, Simon and Harry, were massive, 43 and 32 kilotons respectively. For context, Hiroshima was 13 kilotons. The crew talked about the blasts like they were fireworks. A grip named Tommy Reeves kept a journal where he sketched the cloud shapes. Saw another one this morning, he'd write. Looked like a rose opening up. Susan Hayward mentioned them to a reporter who'd driven out from Las Vegas, describing the distant flashes as prettier than sunrises. Nobody used words like fallout or contamination. The term radioactive showed up exactly 0 times in any production memo. The Atomic Energy Commission told everyone the tests were safe. The ranchers whose sheep started dying blamed their own negligence because that's what the government told them to believe. The film crew from RKO Pictures showed up with trucks full of equipment and 220 people ready to make Howard Hughes's next picture. Listen to what happened when someone finally thought to check what everyone was breathing. Wayne brought the Geiger counter as a joke, or maybe as insurance. Accounts vary on that detail. He'd picked it up at an Army surplus store in Burbank 3 weeks before filming started. Showed it to the stunt coordinator like it was a gag gift. Thought we should make sure we're not glowing in the dark out there, he said, grinning around a Camel cigarette. The coordinator laughed. Everyone laughed. But when he turned it on and pointed it at the ground, at the rocks, at the air itself, the needle jumped and the clicking started and didn't stop. He laughed it off. Told people the thing must be busted. Radiological equipment was finicky. Everyone knew that. Besides, the AEC had cleared the area. The government wouldn't let them film in a hot zone. Except the government had let them film in a hot zone. Wayne tried the counter in different spots by the trailers, near the camera trucks, out where they'd marked the battle scene locations with stakes and colored rope. Same result every time. Click, 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 click in rapid succession, the needle bouncing against the right side of the dial. He showed it to Dick Powell between setups. The director squinted at the device, shrugged, said, "Duke, if that thing's accurate, we'd all be dead already." Then he called for places, and everyone went back to work. Before we go on, you need to understand one thing about how film sets operated in 1954. The chain of trust ran from the Atomic Energy Commission to RKO Pictures to the people standing in the dirt, and every link in that chain had incentives to believe everything was fine. Wayne knew this, Powell knew this, but knowing and acting are different things, and they had a picture to make. Director Dick Powell kept the production moving. Susan Hayward did her scenes in a low-cut costume that looked nothing like anything a Mongol woman would have worn. But this was Hollywood in 1954, and historical accuracy ranked somewhere below good lighting. She'd arrive on set at 5:30 a.m. for makeup, sit in a canvas chair while 3 people worked on her face and hair, then walk out into 110-degree heat, wearing enough fabric for maybe half a dress. Between takes, she'd retreat to a tent with industrial fans that just moved hot air around. Her stand-in, a local girl from St. George, would take her place for lighting setups, standing in the sun for hours while the cinematographer adjusted reflectors and barn doors. Pedro Armendariz played Jamuga with the kind of intensity that made you forget the script was terrible. He was a serious actor, trained in Mexico's golden age of cinema, and he treated every scene like it mattered. Even when the dialogue had him saying things like "the world will tremble before Genghis Khan," he found emotional truth in it somehow. Wayne respected him for that. They'd sit together during lunch breaks, eating sandwiches that tasted like sand and talking about their kids. Armendariz had 3 children back in Mexico City. He showed Wayne photographs. "When this picture wraps," he said, "I'm taking a month off, just family. No scripts, no studios, just time." Agnes Moorehead brought professionalism to a project that didn't deserve it. She'd worked with Orson Welles, performed on radio dramas that were actual art, and here she was playing Hunlin in the Utah desert for a paycheck. But she showed up on time, hit her marks, delivered her lines with conviction. When the assistant director complained about the Paiute extras not understanding his blocking instructions, Moorehead stepped in and walked them through it herself, patient and kind. "They're people, not cattle," she told him. "Try treating them that way." And John Wayne, 6-pack-a-day smoker, Hollywood's biggest star, played a role he'd later call the worst mistake of his career. Not because of the radiation, because playing Genghis Khan when you look and sound like John Wayne was, in his words, making an ass of yourself trying to play parts you're not suited for. 3 months in that desert, 13 weeks of kicking up dust, rolling in dirt, breathing air that tasted like copper and heat. The cast and crew lived in it, worked in it. Some of them, like Wayne, brought their families to visit. His sons Michael and Patrick came out to the set on a weekend in July. Wayne gave them a tour, showed them the fake Mongol village the art department had built, let them sit in the director's chair. They ran around in the red rocks, played with prop swords, kicked up clouds of dust that hung in the still air like fog. Michael, 11 years old, found what he thought was an interesting stone and put it in his pocket. Patrick, 14, helped himself to a costume helmet and wore it around camp making war cries. Wayne took photographs, normal family memories, except for what was in the air they were breathing. Michael would later develop skin cancer. Patrick would have a benign tumor removed from his breast. But none of that mattered yet, because the real problem was still loading into trucks. Remember what I said about Howard Hughes and his attention to detail? Watch what he did next. The interior scenes needed to be shot back in Hollywood at the RKO soundstage. The problem was matching the exterior desert footage, the color of the dirt, the texture, the way light hit it. Hughes was obsessive about continuity. He'd killed entire productions over mismatched shadows. When the production designer pointed out that studio dirt wouldn't match the Utah footage under the arc lights, Hughes didn't blink. "So bring the Utah dirt here," he said, like it was the most obvious solution in the world. So Hughes, eccentric billionaire with unlimited resources and questionable judgment, made a decision that would haunt him for the rest of his life. He had 60 tons of Utah desert soil shipped to Los Angeles, 60 tons of radioactive dirt, loaded into trucks, driven across state lines, dumped onto a Hollywood soundstage so the actors could roll around in it, under controlled lighting, while the cameras captured their performances in glorious Technicolor. Nobody tested it. Nobody questioned it. Nobody thought to ask if maybe, just maybe, this was a spectacularly bad idea. The soil arrived in September. Teamsters unloaded it onto Stage 12, spreading it 6 inches deep across 2,000 square feet. The ventilation system recirculated it into the air. Actors breathed it. Crew members swept it up at the end of each day and dumped it back in piles for the next morning. Wayne did a fight scene where Armendariz threw him to the ground, and he landed face first in that imported dirt, got it in his mouth, spit it out between takes. The script supervisor, a woman named Doris Schneider, would later remember the smell, dry and mineral, with an edge like burnt matches. The film wrapped in early 1955. Everyone went home. The reviews were brutal. The New York Times called it a fatal miscalculation. Variety said Wayne's performance was as convincing as a rodeo clown at a ballet. The box office was mediocre. Wayne moved on to his next picture. The Conqueror became a punchline, notable only for being one of the worst casting decisions in cinema history. Then people started getting sick. Stop for a second and understand the timeline, because this is where it gets dark and slow and inevitable. 1960, Pedro Armendariz, diagnosed with terminal kidney cancer. The pain became unbearable. He tried treatments, radiation therapy, which was grimly ironic given what might have caused the disease. Nothing worked. The cancer spread to his lymph nodes, his bones. In June 1963, he shot himself in a UCLA hospital room rather than face what was coming. His wife found a note that read, "I can't go on." He was 51 years old. 1963, director Dick Powell, lymphoma. He'd been feeling tired for months, chalking it up to age and stress. Then the night sweats started, and the weight loss. By the time he saw a doctor, it was stage 4, dead by January. He was 58. 1964, John Wayne, lung cancer. He'd ignored the chest pain for weeks, told himself it was just smoker's cough, nothing to worry about. Finally collapsed on the set of The Sons of Katie Elder and let them take him to the hospital. The x-rays showed a mass the size of a golf ball in his left lung. They removed 4 ribs in his entire left lung. Declared cancer-free 10 days later, which seemed like a miracle, except it wasn't a cure, just a delay. Wayne went back to work 6 weeks after surgery, moving slower, breathing harder, but refusing to admit weakness. Look at what was happening while Wayne recovered from surgery. The studio sent him scripts, directors called to pitch projects. Reporters wanted interviews about his comeback. Everyone treated it like he'd beaten the thing, like cancer was just another stunt he'd pulled off successfully. But in the privacy of his home, Wayne would wake up at night, unable to breathe properly with only one lung, reaching for the oxygen tank his doctor had prescribed. His wife would find him sitting on the edge of the bed, sweating, terrified, trying to remember what normal breathing felt like. 1974, Agnes Moorehead, uterine cancer, dead in April. Her mother would later say working on The Conqueror killed her daughter. Moorehead had never smoked, never drank, maintained a health-conscious lifestyle that should have protected her. She did yoga before yoga was popular in America, ate organic vegetables from her own garden, took vitamins. It didn't matter. She was 67, but the cancer moved through her like she was made of paper. 1975, Susan Hayward, brain cancer, dead in March. She developed 4 different types of cancer over the years. 4, skin cancer first, then breast, then uterine, then finally the brain tumor that killed her. Her last public appearance was at the 1974 Academy Awards, where she presented Best Actress looking frail and determined, her red hair a wig hiding the effects of treatment. She died less than a year later at 57. Notice something about how quickly the list grew once it started. 1 death might be coincidence. 3 starts looking like pattern. By the time they hit double digits, People started asking questions the studios didn't want to answer. 1979, John Wayne, stomach cancer. The lung cancer had come back in different form. He'd beaten it once, or thought he had. But cancer doesn't care about Hollywood endings. The pain started in his stomach, sharp and persistent. The doctors opened him up and found it everywhere. They closed him up and sent him home, dead in June. He was 72, but the last photos show a man who looked 90, gaunt, yellow-skinned, eaten hollow from the inside. By 1980, when People magazine ran the numbers, 91 of the 220 cast and crew members had developed cancer at some point in their lives. 46 were dead. That's 41% cancer rate, 21% mortality. Statistically, that's within normal ranges for the general population. But most of the general population didn't develop cancer in their 40s and 50s. Most of the general population hadn't spent 13 weeks downwind from atomic bomb tests, breathing irradiated dust, then spent additional months rolling in 60 tons of radioactive soil on a Hollywood soundstage. The count didn't include the hundreds of local Paiute Native Americans who'd worked as extras in crowd and battle scenes. No one kept records of their cancer rates. They were paid day rates and sent home, and if they got sick later, well, no one from Hollywood was keeping track. Howard Hughes became obsessed with the Conqueror. After the cancer reports started coming in, he bought every existing print of the film for $12 million, locked them away in climate-controlled vaults, refused to let it air on television for 21 years. Paramount briefly obtained reissue rights in 1974, but the film essentially disappeared from public view for 2 decades because a billionaire couldn't face what his vanity project might have done. In his later years, Hughes spoke out against nuclear testing, called it dangerous, urged caution, never explicitly connected it to the Conqueror, but everyone who knew the story understood what he wasn't saying. His lawyers advised him to never mention the film in connection with the cancer cases. Liability, they said. Lawsuits. Admitting connection would open floodgates, so Hughes stayed silent and let the guilt eat him from the inside, which is maybe its own kind of cancer. When asked about his cancer years later, John Wayne pointed to the cigarettes. 6 packs a day for 30 years, he'd say. That's what got me. And he wasn't wrong. Tobacco is a proven carcinogen, and Wayne's smoking habit was legendary. His fingers were stained yellow-brown. He'd light a new cigarette off the ember of the old one. Between takes, always a cigarette. During interviews, in restaurants, walking down streets, always smoking. But his friends tried to convince him it was the radiation. The correlation was too strong. Too many people from that one film, sick at unusual ages. Wayne didn't want to hear it. Maybe because accepting it meant accepting that he'd been killed by someone else's decision, not his own. Maybe because he'd brought his sons to that set and exposed them to the same contamination. Maybe because admitting it was radiation meant admitting the government had lied. And Wayne was a patriot who didn't like that kind of talk. He'd supported the bomb tests publicly, called them necessary for national defense. To turn around now and say they'd killed him, that was complicated in ways he didn't want to untangle. Picture the scene from above for just a moment, because context matters here. Wayne sitting in his study in Newport Beach, 1978, surrounded by photographs from every Western he'd made. Rio Bravo on the wall, The Searchers framed above his desk, True Grit next to the window, and somewhere in a drawer, shoved behind scripts and letters, a single photograph from the Conqueror, himself in that ridiculous costume, Hayward next to him, both of them covered in Utah dust, smiling because they didn't know yet what that dust would do. The truth, as best as anyone can determine it, is probably both. The cigarettes weakened him. The radiation finished the job. But epidemiologists will tell you that definitively attributing any single case of cancer to any single cause is essentially impossible. Too many variables, too many factors. The The best you can do is look at the patterns and make educated guesses. But when a Pentagon official says, "Please God, don't let us have killed John Wayne," that's not a guess. That's guilt speaking through bureaucratic prayer. The worst part is how preventable it was. The technology to measure radiation existed. The Geiger counter in Wayne's hands proved that. But institutional momentum is a hell of a force. The AEC wanted to prove nuclear testing was safe. The studio wanted to save money on location costs. Hughes wanted his epic. Everyone involved had incentives to ignore the evidence right in front of them until it was too late. The film itself, when it finally resurfaced in the 1980s after Hughes's death, played on late-night television as a curiosity, a bad movie that killed its cast. The worst kind of Hollywood legend, one that's mostly true and completely avoidable. Critics who reviewed it with fresh eyes noted how everyone looked slightly uncomfortable, slightly wrong, like they knew something was off even then. Wayne's performance had a desperate quality beneath the bluster. Hayward moved through scenes like she was already tired. Powell's direction felt rushed, hurried, like he was trying to get everyone out of there as fast as possible. Wayne kept working until he couldn't anymore. Made The Shootist in 1976, playing a gunfighter dying of cancer, which was either perfect casting or cruel irony, depending on how you looked at it. In the film's final scene, his character dies in a shootout rather than waste away from disease. Wayne understood the impulse. He died 3 years later, and the question of what killed him, the cigarettes or the desert or both, died with him. But the Geiger counter had already given its answer back in 1954. It screamed. Wayne thought it was broken. 25 years later, he was dead. And so were 45 others who'd been standing in that same contaminated sand, breathing that same poisoned air, trusting that someone with authority had checked and declared it safe. The machine wasn't broken. The system was. If you enjoyed spending this time here, I'd be grateful if you'd consider subscribing. A simple like also helps more than you'd think. If you want to hear about the night Susan Hayward's doctor told her she had her 4th type of cancer, and she asked if it could have been the movie, drop a comment below.